Richard, what does the election tell you?
It tells us that people voted for none of the above. There was no clear move towards the Conservatives. They've obviously done well, but it's a 5% swing, which is roughly half the swing we saw in '97 to Tony Blair. I think that Labour have held up remarkably well, considering they've been in power for 13 years and they're led by one of the most unpopular leaders in political history. And the big disappointment, of course, in terms of the actual results, is the Liberal Democrats. We saw a big Liberal surge, and almost overnight that disappeared, and they're back down to kind of the 83 levels that we saw, 23% of the popular vote, and actually slightly fewer seats. The irony being, of course, that despite a very poor performance against what they would have expected, the Liberal Democrats are the people who are being followed around by news helicopters today, and Nick Clegg's every word is being analysed by the press to see what it might mean, because we are in what was once a nirvana for Liberal Democrats, a hung parliament.
So, do you think that a Clegg-Cameron combination could work?
It's very hard to see the politics of that. They disagree profoundly on the speed with which we should be cutting the deficit, which is perhaps the biggest question that will face the next government. It's very hard to imagine the Conservatives delivering on electoral reform, which Nick Clegg made pretty clear about 50 minutes ago, that is a precondition of a deal in government. They have profound differences on Europe, and so it's hard to see the kind of political calculus working there. I don't think you should rule anything out at this stage, but I think there's a kind of coded message there, which is he said, I'll listen to the Conservatives. They have the first right to try and form a government. They won in the sense that they got the most seats and the most votes. But whether or not the Conservatives can deliver against the demands that Clegg's likely to lay out, I'm highly sceptical.
And what pressure is Gordon Brown under now from his own party?
Ironically, I think Gordon Brown's under less pressure than we might have thought. Partly that's because I think they have done better than people feared. I mean, don't forget, people were saying only 24 hours ago that Labour might be headed for its worst election in 80 years. And in fact, Labour have done slightly better than they did in 83 in terms of the popular vote. They're within they're within 60, 70 seats of the Conservatives. This is not a kind of wiping away of the Labour Party. The Labour Party's not been annihilated in this election in the way that some people thought. Given Gordon Brown's weaknesses as a campaigner, in some ways it's sort of seen, I think, as a sign of strength. So I do not see people kind of lining up to kind of defenestrate Gordon Brown as part of a precondition of the deal. And I think actually the kind of case that might have been made earlier for Gordon Brown having to kind of leave office as part of a kind of precursor to some sort of lib-lab coalition or pact, I think that's much weaker now, because after all he came second in the popular vote and beat the Liberal Democrats by 6 percentage points, as well as having the most seats. So actually, I think Brown, the great survivor, just might be around for a couple more years yet.
And finally, what do you think will happen, when do you think the next general election will be?
I think that depends on who forms the government within the next matter. I think we'll know within the next few days who's going to be in government, and that will probably tell us whether or not it's a matter of months before the next election or a matter of years. I think a minority Conservative government is unlikely to last very long, and will probably want to go back to the electorate to get a governing majority. And so I think if it's a Cameron-led minority Tory government, we'll be going back to the polls in the autumn. I think if there's some sort of concordat between the Labour and the Liberal Democrats around electoral reform, that process, in any case of having a referendum and reforming the electoral system, will take a year to 2 years anyway. And so I think if it's Lib-Lab pact, we could be looking at 2 years. If it's the Conservatives, we could be looking at a few months. It's almost impossible at the moment to imagine anybody forming a stable enough government that will last a whole parliamentary term.
Richard, thank you very much.
You're welcome.